The string quartet was playing something slow and a little too formal for a Tuesday night when I noticed her hands were shaking against my shoulder. The Maple Grove Distillery in Calgary had rented out their entire event space for the company's 10th anniversary dinner, the kind of party where everyone wears their one good blazer and pretends the open bar isn't the only reason they showed up early. String lights, a half-decent caterer doing little salmon things on crackers, somebody's cousin running the playlist. It was supposed to be easy, smile, eat, leave by 10, be back at my desk Monday pretending none of it happened. But Margaret Whitfield wasn't supposed to be standing alone by the dessert table looking like she was about to be sick. I want to back up, because none of this makes sense unless you understand what Margaret Whitfield meant to me, or rather, what I thought she meant. My name's Daniel, and 2 years ago I was about 4 months away from quitting the only job that had ever made me feel like I might actually be good at something. I grew up outside Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, in a house where my dad drove a grain truck for the co-op and my mom did the books for 2 different small businesses just to keep us square with the bank. Nobody in my family had ever worked in an office that had a name like Director of Client Strategy on the door. When I got hired at Whitfield & Lowe, a mid-sized financial consulting firm in downtown Calgary, my mom cried on the phone. I remember standing in the parking lot of my apartment building, holding my cell to my ear thinking, okay, this is it. This is the thing that changes everything. It did change everything, just not the way I expected. Margaret Whitfield was the daughter of one of the firm's 2 founding partners, and by the time I joined, she'd already taken over as managing director. People called her things behind her back that I won't repeat, but the gist of it was cold, ruthless, impossible to please. She had a reputation for sending back reports with so much red ink they looked like crime scenes. I watched 2 people quit in my first 3 months alone, both of them walking out of her office white-faced, one of them actually crying in the elevator. She never raised her voice. That was the unsettling part. She'd just go quiet and ask one question, and somehow that question would expose every weak spot in whatever you'd just spent 40 hours building. I used to rehearse my presentations in my car in the parkade before going up, like I was preparing for a cross-examination. 6 months in, I started writing my resignation letter. Not dramatically. I wasn't storming out of anything. I just sat at my kitchen table one night with a glass of the cheap Okanagan Red I always bought because it was on sale, and typed out 2 paragraphs about pursuing other opportunities, which is corporate speak for I can't do this anymore. I didn't send it. I just left it open on my laptop, sitting on the kitchen table, and went to bed telling myself I'd finish it in the morning. Except in the morning, there was an all-staff email reminding everyone that attendance at the anniversary dinner was mandatory, no exceptions, partners included. So I closed the laptop, put on the navy blazer I'd bought specifically because I knew it was the only one in my closet that didn't look like it came from a mall outlet, and went. The venue had exposed brick and big factory windows looking out over the river, the kind of space that costs a fortune to rent in this city and is worth every penny because it photographs well for the company newsletter. Everybody was there. Junior associates clustered near the bar, pretending to be relaxed. Partners doing rounds, shaking hands the whole performance. Margaret arrived 40 minutes late, which I'd never seen her do, she came in wearing a deep green dress, simple, the kind of thing that probably cost more than my monthly rent but didn't look like it was trying to. And the second she walked through the door, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 2 degrees, the way it always did around her. People shushed up. Conversations got a little more careful. But something was off. I noticed it before I even understood what I was noticing. She kept touching the stem of her wine glass without drinking from it. Her eyes kept drifting toward the exit doors, like she was calculating the walk. At one point, she answered a question from one of the senior partners, and her voice came out a half-second too fast, like she was reading lines she hadn't quite memorized. I almost didn't say anything, honestly. My plan for the night was to eat as much of the free shrimp as I could justify, say hello to the right people for exactly long enough, and disappear before anyone noticed. That had been the entire strategy for surviving Whitfield & Lowe events for 2 years running. Then the band shifted into something slower, one of those songs that exists specifically to get reluctant Canadians out onto a dance floor at a work function. And a few couples started moving, and I looked over and Margaret Whit was standing completely by herself near the dessert table, holding a plate of mini butter tarts she clearly wasn't going to eat, watching the room like it belonged to someone else. Nobody went near her. Nobody ever did. I still don't fully know what got into me. Maybe it was that I had nothing left to lose, since in my head I'd already quit. Maybe it was just that I'd spent 2 years being terrified of her, and some reckless part of me wanted to see what would happen if I stopped being terrified for 30 seconds. Whatever it was, I put down my drink, walked across that hardwood floor in front of half the company, and held out my hand. "Would you like to dance, Ms. Whitfield?" She looked at me like I'd spoken in a language she didn't recognize. For a second, I was sure she'd say no, or worse, just walk away and leave me standing there with my hand out like an idiot in front of the entire client services department. Then, very slowly, she put her plate down on the table behind her and placed her hand in mine. That's when I felt it. Her hand was trembling. Not nerves before a presentation trembling. Actual, physical, can't control it trembling. We moved out onto the floor, and I could feel a few sets of eyes on us, the kind of stares that say nobody actually believes what they're seeing. The managing director of Whitfield & Lowe, dancing with a guy from the strategy team who'd been with the firm 2 years and had said maybe 4 sentences to her in that whole time. I didn't know what to do with my hands, with my face, with any of it, so I just let the music carry it. We moved slow circles near the windows, the lights of downtown Calgary smeared yellow and orange against the glass behind her, and I noticed her shoulders were rigid. The kind of rigid that comes from holding something together by sheer force of will. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were wet, not crying, not yet, but close enough that I understood I was seeing something she never let anyone see. For the first time in 2 years, Margaret Whitfield looked human, not the ice queen, not the managing director who made grown men cry in elevators. Just a person, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the late nights everyone assumed she lived for. We didn't say anything for a long stretch. The song kept going, something with a saxophone in it, and around us the party kept happening, glasses clinking. Somebody's laughed too loud near the bar. But it all felt far away, like we were standing in a pocket of quiet the rest of the room couldn't reach. I'd learned one thing from my mom over the years, doing books for stressed-out small business owners who'd come into our kitchen some evenings looking exactly like this. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is not ask questions. So I didn't ask. I just kept my hand steady under hers and let her decide when, or if, she wanted to talk. After what felt like a long time, she took a breath that shook a little on the way in. "We lost the Bregman account this afternoon," she said. Her voice didn't sound like the voice I knew from conference rooms. It was quieter, and there was something underneath it I'd never heard from her before. 2 hours before this dinner. 18 years of relationship gone in a phone call that lasted maybe 4 minutes. I knew enough about the firm to understand what that meant. The Bregman Group wasn't just a client. They were close to a third of Whitfield & Lowe's annual billings, a relationship her own father had built back when the firm operated out of a single floor on 8th Avenue. Losing them wasn't a bad quarter. It was the kind of thing that ends up in industry newsletters with words like restructuring and layoffs attached. She told me the board would be calling an emergency session within the week, that she'd have to be the one to walk into that room and explain how it happened on her watch, that depending on how things shook out, jobs, real jobs, people with mortgages and kids in hockey, might not survive the next 6 months. She wasn't angry when she said it. That was what got me. She sounded hollowed out, like someone who'd spent so many years being the person who fixes things that she genuinely didn't know what to do now that the thing in front of her couldn't be fixed by being smarter or working later. And standing there holding her trembling hand under those string lights, I felt something shift in my chest. All those months of dreading her emails, rehearsing my defenses in the parkade, writing and rewriting that resignation letter, it suddenly felt small, embarrassingly small, next to what she was actually carrying. I told her, almost without deciding to, that I'd been about to quit, that I'd spent 2 years thinking she hated me, that nothing I did was ever good enough for her, that I'd started believing I wasn't cut out for this kind of work at all. She went still, genuinely still, the kind of still that told me she hadn't expected that from me, of all people. Then she shook her head, slow, almost sad. She said she remembered my first deliverable from 2 years ago, a market analysis I'd been sure was going to get me fired on the spot. She said she'd seen something in it, underneath the rough edges, that made her decide to push me harder than almost anyone else on the team. Not because she didn't think I belonged there, because she thought I might actually become one of the best analysts the firm had, if somebody bothered to demand it of me. "I'm not good at telling people that," she said. "I never have been. I thought being hard on you was a kind of respect. I see now it probably just looked like contempt. Hearing that cracked something open in me that I hadn't realized was sealed shut. 2 years of quietly believing I was failing, and the entire time it had been the opposite. The song was winding down by then, the saxophone fading into something softer, and I thought that was it, that we'd step apart and go back to being strangers who happened to work in the same building. But she didn't let go of my hand right away. "There's something else," she said, and her voice dropped low enough that I had to lean in slightly to hear her over the room. "I was in the strategy floor this afternoon, before the Bregman call came in. Your laptop was open on your desk." My stomach dropped straight through the floor. "I wasn't trying to read it," she said quickly. "I was looking for the Hendricks file and your screen was right there. I saw enough to understand what it was, the resignation letter. The one I'd never sent, never finished, just left sitting open on a laptop 2 floors below where she'd been standing. That's part of why I looked the way I did when I walked in tonight," she said. "Losing Bregman was the first blow. Finding out I was about to lose you too on the same day, for reasons I apparently never bothered to explain myself, that was the second." She looked at me directly then, and for the first time since I'd met her, the most intimidating person in that entire building looked almost afraid of what I might say next. "I know I'm not easy to work for," she said. "I know what people call me when they think I can't hear it, but I built half of what's left of this firm out of people who were willing to stay when it would have been easier to leave. I don't want to lose one more." Her hand tightened around mine, just slightly, and then she said the thing I still think about most nights almost 2 years later. "Please don't leave. Not the company, not the team. Just don't leave." I want to tell you I had some perfectly composed response ready, something that sounded like it belonged in a movie. I didn't. I just stood there in that rented event space smelling like other people's perfume and rented string lights, holding the hand of a woman I'd spent 2 years being afraid of, and I understood something I hadn't let myself understand before. That the people who scare us most are very often just the people who are most scared themselves and have gotten extremely good at hiding it. "I'm not going anywhere," I told her, and I meant it in a way I hadn't meant anything in months. The next 6 months were brutal, if I'm honest. Losing the Bregman account triggered exactly the kind of restructuring Margaret had predicted that night. There were sleepless weeks, 2 rounds of layoffs that gutted teams I'd worked alongside for years, client calls that went past midnight trying to rebuild relationships from almost nothing. The kind of stretch where you stop counting how many cups of gas station coffee you've had, because the number stopped being useful information a while ago. But something in the firm changed during that time, and it started with Margaret. She started asking for opinions in meetings instead of just delivering verdicts. She brought junior staff into rooms they'd never been invited into before, including me, and actually waited for us to talk before she did. She started eating lunch in the break room sometimes instead of her office, which doesn't sound like much until you understand what it meant for someone who'd spent a decade building walls specifically, so nobody could see the cracks. People started talking about it like it was the strangest piece of office gossip in years. Margaret Whitfield smiled in a Tuesday status meeting. Somebody actually said that out loud once, half joking, half in disbelief. 2 years on, Whitfield & Lowe isn't just back to where it was before the Bregman account walked. It's bigger. We picked up 3 new mid-market clients in Alberta and Saskatchewan last year alone, brought on staff instead of cutting them, and Margaret's name started showing up in business profiles around the city in a different light than before, demanding, sure, still the toughest person in most rooms she walks into, but described now with a word nobody used to attach to her, loyal. People stay at that firm now in a way they didn't used to. I'm still there too. Director of Client Strategy as of this past January, which is a long way from a kid out of Moose Jaw who almost quit 4 months into his dream job because he was too scared to ask a hard question of the person who hired him. Margaret and I still work closely together, still argue over deliverables the way we always did, and she still sends back draft covered in red ink that makes junior staff wince. But every now and then, usually at year-end events, she catches my eye across a room the same way she did that night by the windows, and there's something in it that wasn't there before. Not romance, nothing like that, just a kind of recognition between 2 people who know exactly what the other one carried once and chose to carry it together instead. I think about that dance more than I probably should. About how close I came to never knowing any of it, to sending that letter, walking out the door, and spending the rest of my career believing my old boss had simply never cared whether I stayed or left. Sometimes the strongest-looking person in the room is the one who needs, more than anyone else there, for somebody to just walk over and ask if they'd like to dance.